Today's episode of the Energy Question Podcast is brought to you by Enverus. The energy industry faces challenges every day, and the events of the last 2 years have caused massive disruptions like never before. Companies in the energy industry need actionable intelligence and a single source of truth that brings all the data together. Enverus is the energy specialized technology partner that provides intelligent connections for a global energy ecosystem. Only Enverus has the analytics, people, experience, and industry scope to connect the right data and information in the right way to discover missed opportunities and deliver fast outcomes. Find out more at Enverus.com. That's ENVERUS.com.
Hello, welcome to the Energy Question with David Blackmon. I'm your host, David Blackmon, and our very, very special guest today is the CEO of the Port of Corpus Christi, America's energy port, Sean Strawbridge. Sean, how are you doing today?
David, I'm doing wonderful. It's not often that I'll interrupt my vacation, but for you, I'm absolutely delighted to today.
Yeah, you're off in South Carolina, huh?
I am indeed. I'm at a wonderful place called Lake Murray and enjoying some hopefully much deserved time with my family.
Well, just for our viewers, I want everyone to know that Sean has, over the last several years, led what I consider to be one of the great undertold economic development stories in the history of the state of Texas at Port of Corpus Christi. It's just been an incredible period of growth. And before we get started, in our interview, Sean, why don't you take a few minutes to just talk about what you do at the port, how things have developed since you arrived, and also, what made it, in your mind, the right time to go to Corpus Christi when you did? Because that's an interesting story in and of itself.
Yeah, David, it's a question I'm asked often. And, Corpus Christi historically is not a well-known city. It's not on the crossroads of really anything. We like to say we're at the end of the road. It's about 3.5 hours by car south of Houston, about 2 hours by car south of San Antonio. And it has been a great run over the last 7.5 years of my tenure. I moved there from Florida. And the reason I moved there is at the time, there was a export ban that had been in place for 40 years for preventing U.S. produced crude oil from being exported. That was a protectionist measure that had been put in place by President Gerald Ford back in the mid-'70s in the wake of the Arab oil embargo of the United States. And there was a lot of talk in Washington, D.C. about the repeal of that 40-year ban. And I suspected that if that ban was repealed, the closest deep draft port to two of the largest energy producing fields in the country, the Eagle Ford Shale and the Permian Basin, would be ideally suited to take full advantage of the exports of crude oil to our allies and our trading partners. So I arrived in mid-2015 expecting that the earliest that repeal of that ban might take place would be under a Republican administration, probably mid-term of a Republican administration. So I was expecting somewhere in 2018, only to be surprised pleasantly, but not yet readily, that ban was repealed in December of 2015, just 6 short months after my arrival there. That was in a bipartisan omnibus agreement between the Democrats and the Republicans, where the Democrats got an extension on their renewable energy production tax credits, and the Republicans got the repeal on this crude export ban.
Right.
2 weeks after President Obama signed that omnibus agreement, the first shipment of crude oil to be exported from the United States in 40 years sailed right out of the Port of Corpus Christi. And David, we've never looked back. And what I like to say is if the innovation in energy extraction technologies, hydraulic fracturing is the rocket, the export ban repeal has really been the rocket fuel for our growth. And we have seen records in 6 of the 7 years that I have been at the Port of Corpus Christi. And here we are in 2022, and we're fully expecting yet again another banner year for us.
Yeah, and that repeal of that ban, of course, was the key event. I think the U.S. Through a process that the Commerce Department governed was exporting maybe 50,000 barrels of oil a day prior to that under those permits, which were very hard to obtain. And now what are we exporting? Just through the Port of Corpus Christi, what are we exporting?
In October of 2022, we set another record. We averaged over 2.2 million barrels per day of crude oil exports through our gateway.
Yeah.
And that, David, represents about a 60% market share of the total national exports of U.S. produced crude oil. And you combine that with the liquefied natural gas exports and the petroleum product exports, that has positioned the Port of Corpus Christi as the largest single gateway for U.S. energy exports in the nation.
Fantastic. Just really amazing stuff. And I write about it as often as I think about it. Unfortunately, it's been too long since you and I talked. So I'm really was thrilled when Lauren Luxembourg at the Carbon Neutral Coalition contacted me a few weeks ago to see if I'd be interested in talking to folks, a member or two of the board. And I went out there and looked at the website, saw you there, and I said, sure, yeah, let's talk to Sean Strawbridge. That'll be great. But before we get into the rest of the interview, talk about the Carbon Neutral Coalition. You're on the board of advisors there, or is it the board of directors? Board of advisors, right? And with a lot of other great folks. I mean, the members of this board are amazing. How was that coalition formed, and talk about what its purpose is here in Texas?
Yeah, David, the Carbon Neutral Coalition was really the brainchild of Corby Robertson. And when Corby calls, most of us, we answer the call. And Corby has put together an impressive team. We've got an executive director in John Coliandro. John used to be the senior policy advisor to Governor Abbott.
Right.
We've got a great mix of academia, industry, and government. And really, the focus and goal of the Carbon Neutral Coalition is to work to create great public policy that continues to promulgate more energy use, and particularly in the state of Texas, and do it in a responsible manner. And so from my standpoint, I'm pretty excited about the role of the Port of Corpus Christi in the Carbon Neutral Coalition, not only in creating that great public policy, but also making sure that we've got landowners that have great support of that public policy. Because at the end of the day, Texas has some ideal geologic formations, same types of formations that have made us such a prolific energy producer. Those geologic formations are ideally suited for large-scale carbon injection and permanent storage.
Yeah.
The challenge that we have is that we've got to have public policy that creates a bit of a sunset on the responsibility. Today, there is responsibility in perpetuity. Once you've injected that carbon, if you're the owner of that carbon, you have a perpetual responsibility to ensure the integrity of the pore space. That increases cost. That increases risk. What we want to do is, if we can define a sufficient period of time in which the integrity of that pore space has remained intact, that at some point that responsibility sunsets on the individual responsible party and the state takes over. Government and industry have to work together if we're going to achieve some of these lofty atmospheric decarbonization goals. And this is one area where I commend Corby and the rest of the Carbon Neutral Coalition for having that vision of bringing government and industry together with the science that's been developed and researched by academia. Bring all of that to the state legislature, and let's craft some really strong public policy that's going to support atmospheric decarbonization initiatives while protecting great Texas companies.
Yeah, and I've interviewed executives at ExxonMobil about their enormous project related to carbon capture that they have, that they have underway now, partnering with a bunch of other companies there in Houston, but involving pore space up and down the Gulf Coast of Texas and Louisiana. And in a recent episode of this podcast, I interviewed Tim Duncan, the CEO of Talos Energy, who has also become involved in several projects along the Texas and Louisiana Gulf Coast, including one in Corpus Christi, centered around Corpus Christi. And the opportunity there is just, this is far and away the biggest carbon capture opportunity really in the United States, just right here on the Texas and Louisiana Gulf Coast, correct?
Yeah, that's correct, David. First of all, the largest single concentration of target sources, that's what the emitters like to be called for your audience. They don't like to be called emitters.
Right.
But the largest concentration of target source emissions of CO2 in the entire country is along the Houston Ship Channel. It's over 250 million tons a year just in that area there. The entire state of Texas is the largest emitter of carbon dioxide in the country, about 840 million tons a year. That's more than California and Louisiana combined. So one of the questions is, well, why? Why is Texas such a large emitter? Well, because we're a producing state, we're a manufacturing state, we're an energy state. And so we've got those opportunities to do something that is really going to move the needle. And when you talk about my good friend Tim Duncan at Talos Energy, they've partnered with another great customer of ours, Howard Energy Partners.
Right.
And we brought in the Texas General Land Office, and we're working with them to develop over 13,000 acres directly for carbon capture sequestration. We're currently in the project evaluation phase, and bringing in the Port of Corpus Christi as the landowner, and certainly as an entity that can receive federal grant dollars, and there's a tremendous amount of federal grant dollars that are available for the promulgation of carbon capture use and storage infrastructure. We think it's a great model, and we think we've got some great ingredients for success with our partners at Talos Energy and Howard Energy Partners. And we're really working to develop scalable, centralized geologic storage solutions, both onshore on port-owned pore space and state-owned submerged lands in the near-shore Gulf of Mexico. That's really the vision, and we think we've got a great solution, and we're excited about the future. And by the way, people might ask, well, why is this so important? Well, it's not just important for today's atmospheric decarbonization initiatives domestically, but when you look at the geopolitical climate that we're in, David, and you see now Russia has proven to be an unreliable supplier of energy to Western European energy consumers, particularly manufacturers, we think there is going to be a reshoring of manufacturing away from the European continent. And we think that South Texas is an ideal location. And all of those European companies, as most manufacturers, they've already established decarbonization goals for their shareholders.
Right.
And we think if we can codify a centralized carbon management solution, it's going to be another economic development tool in the toolbox.
Yeah, and to me too, when I look at it, I see that can be such a, I think, an important tool also in ensuring that we here in the United States can maintain a healthy and robust oil and gas sector while still meeting these carbon reduction goals into the future. And as you just talked about, the developments geopolitically from the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which is such an awful event this year, now that Russia can't really become ever again a reliable supplier of crude oil to Western Europe or Europe in general, that makes it all the more important for the United States to continue to be a big supplier of crude oil, not just for its own needs, but also internationally, correct?
Oh, unquestionably. And I think it's important. This is a seminal moment in the history of the United States, and certainly in our ability to maintain our alliances, our NATO alliances, which have grown, and certainly our position globally as a superpower. And let's not squander this opportunity with federal regulations, and you've got different federal agencies under the current administration that are saying different things. You've even got same agencies saying different things. Let's not squander this opportunity to really become an energy powerhouse globally, supplying our allies with a safer, more reliable source of energy, and getting them off of their dependency of more nefarious sources of energy like Russia, like Iran, like Venezuela. This is really not just about economics, but this is about national security and a foreign policy. And we are in an ideal situation and an enviable situation to capitalize on that. Let's not squander it.
Well, let's move on to talk about some other things happening at the port. I would be very remiss if I didn't mention the fact that you guys just celebrated a pretty important anniversary there at the port here recently.
We did. We had our 100th birthday. We celebrated our centennial centennial celebration of formation. The Port of Corpus Christi was formed in 1922. And really, it was in the wake of a hurricane that had hit the region in 1919 and had decimated the region. And it was the King Ranch and the King family, very prominent family in Texas even today, who had the vision of creating what they termed a safe harbor port in Corpus Christi. So they were able to get the port formed in 1922. Took another 4 years to construct the initial inner harbor, where our current administration building is today, is right on the original grounds of where the original Port of Corpus Christi is.
What a beautiful building it is, too.
Thank you. And I will tell you, the founders, our founding fathers, they had a vision for a deep drop port that would serve as an economic engine for the region and certainly for the state. But now we've become, as I said earlier, the nation's largest export gateway for American energy. So it's critical national infrastructure as well. And I'm confident that our forefathers, our founding fathers, would be proud of where the Port of Corpus Christi has come in the last 100 years.
Well, it's certainly such an important driver of the economy here in Texas, and of course for South Texas in particular. But one of the key projects you've had going on for several years now is this project working with the Corps of Engineers to deepen and widen the main channel at the port. And that, of course, involves you having to go to Washington a lot and talk about why we need more funding to get that project completed. Give us an update on where that project stands and how much more time you think is going to be involved to get it finished.
Yeah, thanks for the question, David. The Corpus Christi Ship Channel Improvement Project has been a long time in coming. This is our sixth time in our 100-year history of deepening the Corpus Christi Ship Channel. This is a project, because it's a federal channel, that's being overseen by the United States Army Corps of Engineers. It took quite a while, quite a bit of federal bureaucracy for us to get to the point where we could actually have dredgers in the water with sufficient appropriations from Congress. From 1990 to 2017, to be exact. It took 27 years to get through the phalanx of bureaucracy, to get the legislation enacted, and to get the first dollar of funding. Once President Trump included us in one of his early budgets, once you get that first dollar of funding, you're off to the races. And so I'm pleased to report that this 4-phase project, phases 1 is complete, phases 2 and 3 are currently under construction, and phase 4 has been included so far in the spending package that's being contemplated by Congress, not yet passed. We're currently in what's called a continuing resolution, but we anticipate that a funding package will be passed sometime in December, and that will include funding for what we call project closeout. And should that spending package include that, we think we could be completed with the entire project by early 2024. Once the project's completed, the Corpus Christi ship channel will be the deepest and the widest in the entire U.S. Gulf. And, bigger is better when it comes to transportation and shipping. And what this allows is for our customers to be able to load more on the larger vessels, which lowers the transportation cost of American goods and makes them more competitive on the international markets.
Yeah, and when the project's completed, you'll be able to more easily land the VLCCs, but you still won't be able to fully load them in the port itself, correct? You'll still have to lighter some of the cargo out in the deeper waters. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Unfortunately, when the feasibility study commenced in 1990 with the Army Corps of Engineers, fracking was not a thing.
Yeah.
VLCCs were not even being contemplated. So over that 27 years of bureaucracy that I mentioned, the market has changed significantly. And this is what we impress upon the regulators and the appropriators, the elected officials at the federal level, is we have to really work much faster in order to build national critical infrastructure. And the permitting bureaucracy is taking way too long. My father was a World War II vet, and he had 5 boys. And he used to tell us, boys, we made more things between Pearl Harbor Day on December 7th, 1941, and VJ Day in September of 1945 than your generation has been able to do. So it really, what we've got to be able to do is clear the bureaucratic mud off our boots and move a little swifter in clearing the path for these large infrastructure projects, which do nothing but benefit our country, not only from an economic standpoint, but as I said, national security. We're now the largest gateway for military cargoes moving through a commercial port in the entire United States, ensuring that the American warfighter readiness is at the highest possible level. But we need to continue to ensure that we've got that supporting infrastructure, and it starts with a channel that can sufficiently handle those larger classification of vessels. So even today, the VLCCs with the new and improved ship channel cannot fully load. They'll have to go offshore, and then the remaining cargoes will be shuttled out to them. That creates more cost, more emissions, potentially more congestion of the ship channel. So there's things that we still want to do to ensure that we can fully load those VLCCs in safe harbor.
Well, one of the things that has been going on now for a while is the Blue Water, Texas satellite port out in the waters of the Gulf that involves Phillips 66 and Trafigura. And talk about what the status of that project is, because it will be able to fully load VLCCs when it's completed, correct?
That's right. That's what's called a single point mooring facility. We like to call it a buoy. Yeah. An offshore buoy. It's not unprecedented. In fact, Phillips 66, one of the reasons why we partnered with Phillips 66 on this project is they already operate one on the east coast of the United Kingdom and have since the early 70s, right off of an area called Hull, Hull, where they have a refinery. And they've been operating safely since the early 70s, one of these buoys. And we are somewhat perplexed that the EPA has opposed the Phillips 66 project with an operator who has 50 years of experience, and yet they have given tacit approval for a project closer to Freeport in Texas with Enterprise, where Enterprise has never operated one of these facilities. So this goes back to my point about here you've got same agencies saying different things. I'm confident, though, that Phillips 66 will work through some of the concerns that the EPA has. We certainly, as a government agency, are going to provide a modicum of oversight to the project. But, in the absence of having that type of a facility, we're just adding more cost and making American oil uncompetitive against some of those more nefarious sources. So that's where we're hopeful that the federal government will perhaps see the value of this project and recognize that it actually will reduce emissions, not increase emissions, as the EPA has tacitly asserted.
So you mentioned LNG and Cheniere Energy's facility there at the port a little bit ago. And of course, we have this increased focus on LNG exports now with the demand from Europe, particularly, which the need is so severe there on the continent. Are you looking at, is the port expecting any other new LNG expansions to take place in the coming years right there in Corpus Christi?
We certainly are. In fact, Cheniere, they announced an expansion at their Corpus Christi liquefaction facility. They currently will move about 16 million tons of LNG this year. They're on track to do about 16 million tons in 2022. They've announced a 9 mid-scale train expansion project to the tune of about $8 billion.
Holy cow.
They've already broken ground, and that will add not quite another 15. I think it's probably more in the 11 to 12 million ton range. Currently, the Corpus Christi liquefaction facility is the second largest LNG liquefaction facility in the country, behind Cheniere's Sabine Pass facility, which is on the Louisiana side of the Sabine-Neches waterway. So this makes the Corpus Christi liquefaction facility the largest in Texas. And we're excited about their growth and just all of the success that they've seen under Jack Fusco's leadership. We're grateful for their patronage and certainly are as supportive as always to see their expansion come to fruition. Unfortunately, those expansions take time and, as I said, tremendous capital. And we're going into winter, and our Western European allies may see a pretty cold winter. And we're not going to be able to see any of the fruits of that expansion until probably 2024 or maybe even 2025, depending upon the construction schedule.
Yeah. Well, gosh, the sooner the better, obviously. These half hours go so fast. I'm going to have to consider making this an hour-long show, I think. But we're running up against time here. I just can't thank you enough for taking time out at this point while you're traveling and to do this with me. And let's be sure and catch up on a regular basis. And I promise I won't let a year go by before I get in touch with you again.
Well, David, it'd be my pleasure. And as I said, there's not many people that I interrupt my vacation for, but you're certainly one of them. So it's great to see you again. And I hope you and all your audience have a very happy holidays.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And that's it for this episode of The Energy Question with David Blackmon. Signing off, and we'll see you next time.